It is always so good to be here. The weather today was a really nice setup for my title. For those of you who haven't read it in the weekly email or whatever, my title this morning is "Coming from the Cold: Hospitality as a Distinctively you, maybe, Spiritual Practice." So it's about hospitality and spiritual practice, but what I really want echoing in your brain right now is coming from the cold. And when I say that, I'm also kind of hoping you hear Joni Mitchell in the background.
Yes.
Everybody hear that? Because I've been playing that song over and over in my head through the week. So the chorus to that song says over and over, it's kind of a long song. I thought about playing it for you, but it's very long. The chorus says over and over again, all I ever wanted, all they ever wanted, all we ever wanted was to come in from the cold. All we ever wanted was to come in from the cold. Assuming that that is true, and I think that on some level it's universally true for warm-blooded creatures like us human beings, how ought we to act as spiritual beings in our religious lives? How ought our communities to function? What does it mean to extend hospitality? And I have to note that someone in this congregation asked after one of the talks I gave while we were talking afterwards, what does it mean to be welcoming? Somebody, and it may have been one of the people who's in this room now, or it may have been somebody who was there after that talk. And I remember writing that down, going, that's an interesting, I should dig into that a little bit more. And so thinking about that over the space of several months, this talk today is where I landed, was with this, all we ever wanted was to come in from the cold. So you seeded this talk, and here it is. Hospitality. When we say hospitality, a lot of times we think about sort of like, the hospitality industry. And we think about the logistics of setting out a room and setting the table and what's on the table and who gets invited and how do we deliver the invitations. And all of those logistics are very, very important. And the people who take care of them, like, I don't know, Lucy, maybe, are really crucial to any community. And that's a whole nother sermon. I'm not going to talk about that so much today. What I want to talk about is, what does it mean to extend a welcome? What does it mean? How do we stand in a doorway between the warm space and the cold out there and say, come in from the cold? How do we extend that welcome? The who of welcoming is both about welcomers and welcomed. And I want to just point out here that we are all both of those things at different times. We are sometimes the people saying, come in, and we are sometimes the people out in the cold who need someone to say, come in, warm up. And then the cold in this metaphor, there are so many possibilities. There are so many ways people can be left out in the cold: political ways, philosophical ways, psychological, economic, social. And then there's, of course, the meteorological, which we had, this last year. These last few weeks, a lot of cold. There are perhaps more ways to be left out in the cold than we can imagine. And I think part of the world we live in these days, with the kinds of communications and ever-expanding ways of being connected to one another, we discover more and more and more cold that people are stuck in all the time. It is, as we've mentioned before, sometimes kind of overwhelming. So when we invite somebody in from the cold, or when we are invited in, what is that warm space? What is that about? What is it to welcome someone? What does a welcoming space look like? And I'm going to propose, when I first thought of it as safety and freedom. And then I decided safety is actually a subset of freedom, because freedom, I think, is always helpful to think of freedom in two ways. There's always freedom from what? There's always freedom for. What good is our freedom? How do we exercise it? Where do we go with it? So safety this sense of feeling safe. And we talk about creating safe spaces and being a safe space for each other. I love the way, for instance, you structure talkback. It makes it a safe place for people to explore ideas and express themselves. But safety, I'm going to say, is a freedom from threat. And those threats can be all kinds of things. And freedom in a welcoming space is freedom from disrespect, from judgment, from oppression, from isolation. I know you could make your own lists of things you're yearning to be free of, or freedoms you know that you wish you could share with other people. So that's the freedom from. Welcoming spaces also, we create them because they help us be free for the things that we value, the things that are listed in our 7 principles as Unitarian Universalists. My own list, I just jotted down. We're free to be open. We're free to be curious. We're free for life and love, for service, for connection. We're free to overcome the isolation that's inherent sometimes in being human beings. We're free to make justice in our own small communities and in the broader communities of which we're a part. So all of that is sort of where I'd like us to be thinking as we're thinking about what is it to welcome people into our community. Now, I'm biased. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I think Unitarian Universalism is a grand space to live in. And I kind of think in some ways we are distinctively hospitable and welcoming. I would like to think that, at any rate. So historically, I think Doug did a sermon about the Edict of Torda earlier this month, right? So I want to remember that. That's a moment of welcoming, of hospitality. You have dissenters and heretics. And there is a conscious decision not to make a judgment call about who is right and wrong, but to say people should practice and should seek the truth their own ways and be led by leaders that they choose. There's that release from a requirement to follow the king in religion. There's also that historic moment in Torda. I don't know how Doug chose to focus that sermon. There's so much going on in that moment in history. But one of the things that was interesting to me when I was researching it, because I did a sermon somewhere else about it, was that the main characters in the drama that led up to that proclamation of toleration went from being Roman Catholic to Lutheran to Calvinist to anti-Trinitarian or Unitarian. Within a few years, really. It's a moment in European history of great movement and change. And so UUs come from people who are seekers, searchers, and come-outers. Not all of us, but many of us come out of some other tradition and into Unitarian Universalism. Again, we've been somewhere else searching, and someone said, come in, and we came in. So we're come-inners, too. So I'd like, just for a moment, for you to think about how and why did you come to Unitarian Universalism? Or how and why did you come to some other place that was sort of paradigmatically warm and welcoming to you? Think of whatever time. It might be this space, it might be another time, another day, another place. What was the cold that you came in from? And how did you feel warmed on that day? How did you know that you were in a safe place, a place where you were free from cold and free for something bigger and better that you wished for? People come to Unitarian Universalism for all kinds of reasons. They come to our particular congregations for lots of different reasons. What they find when they get here, and one of the things that I think makes us distinctively hospitable and welcoming, is a lack of dogma. There's a theological freedom about who we are. We don't say, we believe this thing. We say, we affirm individual human beings, and we affirm communities that work together in the ways of democracy and truth-seeking and justice-making. We affirm the interconnection of everything. And I should say too, and you may in your discussion of Torta may or may not have found that we've come a long way over the centuries of Christian thought, really, from which we came as a tradition. We have not always been about theological freedom, not even on this continent. It's been hard won through long conversations, and we should remember that. Hospitality and welcoming is not always just a cheerful, oh, let's put out some good food and open the door and wave people in. It can be downright challenging. But at our best, we have a certain availability to be hospitable to many folks who have found themselves left in the cold by those who cherish dogmatic certainty. With universalism and interconnectedness as core values, we don't offer a particular space that's warm for just a few people. We aspire to provide a space that is warm to any and all who wish to be in it. And that's a different thing than you find in a lot of places in the world. I think most of us spend a lot of our time trying to find our niches. And those niches are wonderful, great, warm things. We find the people over here who share these interests, and we spend this part of our time with them, and people over here who share those interests. And here, there's a certain amount of that, too. We tend to be a certain kind of people, but we aspire to be a place, I'm going to just repeat this again, that welcomes any and all who wish to come in and join us. We're not a bunch of separate rooms trying to meet different needs of different cliques of people. And right now in this world, I think that there's a certain urgency to our attempts to try to be that kind of welcoming space. The coldness of the world we live in right now, I think, it weighs on us all heavily, I think. And it has been that way for some time now. The ways in which we are cold and the ways in which our fellow human beings are left out in the cold are multifaceted. They're multiple. And there are so many, there are false welcomes and there are limited welcomes. There are spaces that purport to be warm and welcoming that leave people out in the cold feeling judged, feeling unwanted if you don't toe the correct line or don the right hat or carry the right sign or whatever. And there are, and this makes us all very sad, there are reports of coldness from within our own tradition, our own Unitarian Universalist Association. It seems that the room is warmer for some people than it is for others, more open to some than to others. And we're coming to learn slowly, kind of painfully sometimes, that how the welcome and openness of the room looks different from different perspectives. And that's very hard for us because we have tried in good faith over long periods of time to be a people who say, welcome, come in from the cold. And we're being stretched now to learn the ways in which we haven't done that as well as we might. So my question this morning is, again, what does it mean to be people who cherish this hospitality that we offer to others? And I go back to Joni Mitchell. And she says that the opening stanza of her song, it's back in 1957, we had to dance a foot apart. And I grew up Roman Catholic, and I know in the 70s, at late 70s, in Catholic schools, there were still people doing this. She continues, they hawk-eyed us from the sidelines, holding their rulers without a heart. There were, I never went to one of those dances where somebody was actually patrolling the dance floor, but I heard there was one sister who used to go up and whisper to couples, leave room for the Holy Spirit. So I know this image didn't come out of nowhere, this image that Joni Mitchell starts with. She says, they hawk at us from the sidelines, holding their rulers without a heart. And all we ever wanted was to come in from the cold. She also says, I know we will never be perfect, never entirely clear. We get hurt and we just panic and we strike out of fear. And she says, I am flesh and blood and vision. I am howling in the dark. And she says over and over and over again, and all we ever wanted was to come in from the cold. So I wonder what could happen if I could hold enough space in my judgments of people, if I could sort of put my ruler away long enough to entertain the possibility that objectionable expressions, words or deeds, behavior, are the howling in the dark of people who are as much flesh and blood and vision as I am. Might it make me more likely to open doors, to say, come in from the cold? And I have a note here to myself. I'm talking metaphorically here, but of course there is a literal part of this coming in out of the cold too. And many of us are involved in ministry to the homeless. And I'm not saying we all need to say, come over to my house. There's always limits to what we can do and how we can do it. Sometimes saying coming out of the cold means looking at, speaking to people, being present with them. It's not necessarily, literally, about your own house. So how is welcoming a spiritual practice? How is it the work of a religious community? Well, we have our 7 principles, and all of them apply in one way or another to this issue, but especially the first and the 7th. The first saying that every person is worthy and worth dignity and respect. And the 7th one that talks about the interconnectedness, the interdependence of all of creation, of which we are just a part. I added the just. But to me, those 2 principles together, they say everyone belongs, everything belongs. All of it is part of our concern. All of it needs to be welcomed into our attention, into our hearts, sometimes into our homes, our warm rooms, our conversation circles for sure. Everything belongs. Everyone belongs. And that's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, and really I can't give you a good argument for why that is so. I'm going to claim that everyone just does belong. Everything does belong. That's just the way it is. That's reality. And it demands of us a certain humility. And I don't take humility to be about self-abnegation, wiping myself out or thinking myself less than anything. I take humility to be an understanding of who I am, of who we are, how we are as human beings, our place in the larger world, our place as a community within the larger community of communities, my place as a person among other people. And also humility involves accepting that lack of perfection that Joni Mitchell's song goes to. And if you're struggling with that idea, there are so many examples of how we are not perfect and we cannot ever be perfect. And I will say to you, as I've said before, perfection is not required. We're required to try our best to do the work, but perfection is never required. And the work will never be done. So how do we, particularly as Unitarian Universalists, how do we become a refuge from the cold for those who are stuck out in the cold and need our invitation? And I think there's two parts of this work. One is to dream, to desire, to come to understand, how do we make this list of 7 principles? How do we need to think through what we think we can be to the world and how we understand ourselves and the warm place that we want to create. We have to want to be a community of warm welcome. And the second part is that we know and cherish our freedoms. Those things we are free for because we have a safe, warm community. And we have to practice those freedoms. We have to be willing to stand up and walk footstep after footstep through the path that helps us to practice those freedoms. We need to extend them, we need to make them stronger, we need to understand them better and imagine them. This ties back to that first part of how we do this. We have to imagine better and better ways to be free and to help others into that freedom. We say here we are free to value the things we value, to practice those things. Life and love and openness, curiosity and service to life and love. Justice making, connection with each other and with others. And this is hard for some of us, I think. We have to practice being the people in the cold who are welcomed in. We have to practice sometimes hearing those who are saying to us, come in from the cold. And we need to say, yes, I will. I'll come in, thank you, and be in your warm room and hear what you dream of and the freedoms you practice and see. Maybe we need to be better connected. And some of that's also just a basic being connected with each other and knowing that we rely on each other to live. We need each other, all sorts of ways, all kinds of times during our lives. To get up, to move on, to continue in our lives. And all of this is an invitation that we extend and which is extended to us. So my charge to you on this January morning, which is not cold, but is kind of gray and wet, is to think about the ways in which we as human beings are both welcomers and welcomed. So I hope as you go out into the world from this space, which I think has been a warm, welcoming, safe space, and try to recognize a few of the ways in which we human beings fail each other, ways in which we leave each other out in the cold. I'd like you to be on the lookout for opportunities to invite folks to come in from the from the cold, into whatever warm rooms you can invite them to. And I also want you to say, thanks, I will, when you are invited in yourself. And I hope for a world in which all of us find the rooms, the warm rooms that we need when we need them, and someone to say, come in from the cold. May it be so, and may we be so.